Everyone knows Caesar's Legion, the Brotherhood of Steel, the NCR, and on and on. But what about the small guys? The factions that fit between the cracks of the bigger boys? That's what I wanted to cover today. Maybe factions in New Vegas that you've never heard of. In the coming weeks, I'll be covering all of the factions in all of the games every Tuesday or maybe Wednesday. So if you enjoy Fallout or you're interested in that, then consider subbing up. Thanks for watching, guys, and enjoy the vid. The Mojave Express is basically a post-war delivery service. It started in the hub and by 2281 had a branch running out of Prim. As society started rebuilding in the Southwest, companies like this started popping up to help move letters and packages across huge stretches of the wasteland. The NCR expanding east created even more demand for reliable couriers, and the Mojave Express stepped in to fill that gap. Their couriers handled deliveries all over, from New California to the Mojave and everywhere in between. Us, as in the courier, actually works for them and gets hired to deliver mysterious packages from Sunnyvale up to New Vegas, which is what starts off the whole story. In the game, the Mojave Express also runs drop boxes. These are just little storage points that the courier can use to move items between different spots. There's one in the main office in Prim and 4 others scattered around the Mojave. You have Good Springs, Novak, Freeside, and the Strip. And I don't think a lot of people actually know about these. The Mojave Express only shows up in Fallout New Vegas. And according to Josh Sawyer, the devs intentionally kept the courier's background and that first delivery pretty vague so we could fill in the blanks ourselves. Beyond that, we don't know much about the group outside of this info. A lot of the info that we have on raider gangs like the Jackals and the Vipers comes from the Fallout Bible. Not all of it, but quite a bit, which is iffy canon-wise. I just wanted to let you know before we dive into these guys so that you can keep that in mind. The Jackals are one of the raider tribes that came out of Vault 15, way back in the early 2100s. From the start, they were all about survival, and that mindset turned them into one of the more vicious groups in the wasteland. During a brutal winter not long after they left the vault, they got trapped and ended up eating their own to stay alive, and that kind of set the stage for their entire identity. Cannibalism became a normal part of their culture and they stuck to it, though for whatever reason, they never ate mutants. Apparently, they tasted bad. With the Vipers and the Khans, the Jackals started raiding nearby settlements like Shady Sands. They were a constant problem for a while, but after years of fighting, the Khans eventually pushed them out of New California around 2155. Even after getting driven back, the Jackals kept causing trouble for the NCR, who by then had grown out of those same settlements that the Jackals used to raid. The NCR and the Jackals kept fighting for decades, and by the time in New Vegas, the tribe had been beaten down so badly they were basically reduced to scattered gangs hiding out in rundown outposts and shacks. In the Mojave, the largest group of Jackals is holed up in the Nevada Highway Patrol Station, with smaller camps at places like Prospector's Den and Nipton Road Pit Stop. They don't really have any kind of unified structure anymore, just small bands following whoever happens to be the toughest at the moment. Their society is basically what you'd expect from a down bad raider group. They fight in packs, rush enemies to overwhelm them, and then run away the moment things start going bad. A lot of them file their teeth into sharp points, and will even fake their death just so they can grab bodies later. They fight over loot all the time, and they don't build anything themselves, they just scavenge whatever they can find. Most of their gear is in awful shape, and they use whatever weapons are available. Most rely on melee weapons or basic firearms, and the leaders might wear some beaten up metal armor while everyone else is in dirty clothes. The Jackals don't really get along with anyone. Even though they came from the same vault as the Khans and the Vipers, they still hate them, especially the Khans, as we know. They never built any kind of relationship with the NCR and are hostile to basically everyone they run into. They only actually appear in New Vegas, but they were originally planned to show up in earlier games like the original Fallout and Van Buren. But those ideas ended up getting cut. The Vipers are another raider tribe that came out of Vault 15, just like the Jackals and the Khans. They started forming around 2097, when Jonathan Faust led a group of vault dwellers out into the wasteland. Not long after leaving the vault, they found a small oasis and set up a camp, but things went bad fast. Faust fell into a deep pit filled with vipers and disappeared. A week later, he came back acting totally different, claiming he'd been shown a true way by a god in the pit. He convinced the survivors to follow this new religion centered around the Great Snake, and that's how the Vipers were born. They built a shrine around the pit and started attacking anyone who rejected their beliefs. Human sacrifices became a regular thing. By 2125, the Vipers were raiding places like the Hub, but a coordinated defense pushed them north. Even after they were defeated, they rebuilt by capturing slaves and raiding caravans. Under their new leader, another Faust, they became even more aggressive. which eventually drew the attention of the Brotherhood of Steel. The Brotherhood wiped out most of the tribe in a ruthless extermination campaign. By 2162, the few survivors were scattered and a lot of them fled to the Mojave. In the Mojave, the Vipers never really recovered. The NCR ran them off anytime they tried to return to California. So they ended up as small, isolated bands of raiders. By the time of New Vegas, they've forgotten most of their old beliefs and rituals, and they're reduced to petty ambushes along highways. Back when they still had their original culture, the Vipers acted more like a cult than a normal raider group. They worshipped snakes, preferred night raids, and used bone weapons coated with venom to paralyze their victims. They wore bone and leather armor and followed a strict hierarchy, led by the Great Snake Keeper and a group of elite warriors known as the Crimson Tongues. They performed ritual snake venom ceremonies, including trances and initiation rites, where failures were fed to the snakes in the pit. New captives could sometimes earn a place in the tribe if they completed a dangerous task for them. By 2281, none of that structure is really left. The Vipers in New Vegas wear whatever scavenged gear that they can find, usually worn out merc outfits or stolen armor, and most of their weapons are in bad shape. You'll mostly run into them in camps around Highway 95, Bonnie Springs, Harwood's Farmstead, and a few small ambush sites along the main roads. The Scorpions are a small-time raider gang in the Mojave. They run their operations out of the Monte Carlo Suites, the rundown budget hotel in Westside, and they mostly make caps by selling chems. They're led by Yvette and spend most of their time either harassing locals or getting wrecked by the fiends, who are way more aggressive and better armed. Even Klamath Bob jokes that the Scorpions are usually at the Monte Carlo, slinging chems or getting their heads blown off by the fiends. They don't have any kind of real power or structure. It's basically a group of wannabe raiders with cheap guns. Most of them carry basic firearms like 10mm pistols, sawed-off shotguns, or SMGs, and a few have melee weapons like switchblades or lead pipes. If the courier gets close, they'll immediately open fire. But they're pretty cowardly, and will run off if enough of their buddies get killed. Originally, the gang leader Yvette was supposed to give us an unmarked quest to help them secure ammo from the NCR quartermaster at Camp McCarran, but that content never made it into the final game. Only a note called Ammunition for Scorpions is left in the files. Once you wipe them out, they're gone for good. They don't respawn, and the Monte Carlo pretty much turns into another abandoned ruin. Basically, they're a gang of small-time thugs who picked the wrong neighborhood to mess around in, and never had the numbers or firepower to become anything more. The Greasers are a small raider group hanging out in the northern sewers underneath Westside. I know, it surprised me too when I first heard of these guys. They're kind of hidden, and really for no good reason. They're a pretty new problem. They showed up recently and started harassing the settlers who live down there. Crandon, one of the local organizers, is fed up with them and asks the courier to deal with the situation. The gang isn't big, it's just 4 guys. 3 regular members who usually carry melee weapons like pool cues or baseball bats, and their leader, Greasy Johnny. Johnny's a bit better equipped and will either have a caravan shotgun or a basic energy weapon. Other than that, the group doesn't have much firepower or influence. When the courier gets involved, they can either talk the Greasers into leaving peacefully or just take them out. They're very reminiscent of the Tunnel Snakes for me. I felt like Jacobstown deserved a place on a faction list. They're very different from most of the towns in the Wasteland. Jacobstown is an old pre-war ski resort up in the mountains northwest of New Vegas. After his first attempt at building a mutant-friendly settlement at Black Mountain fell apart, Marcus decided to try again somewhere more isolated. He eventually found this place in the early 2260s, and he turned it into a safe haven for super mutants and Nightkin. He named it Jacobstown after a close friend of his, a Brotherhood of Steel knight who helped Marcus build Broken Hills back in the day. Marcus's main goal is to give mutants and humans a place where they can peacefully coexist. The town mostly survives on ranching bighorners. They use the meat and trade the hides with passing caravans. The place feels calm, but things aren't perfect. A lot of the Nightkin are impatient because Marcus promised to help with their mental instability, and the cure has been slow. Keen, who acts as the voice of the Nightkin in the town, doesn't think Marcus truly understands their struggle, and is pushing for a different approach. There's a real risk they'll split off if nothing changes. A former Enclave scientist, Dr. Henry, actually lives in Jacobstown, and has been trying to develop a cure for the Nightkin's condition. Marcus supports the effort, but like I said, the progress has been frustratingly slow and the tension keeps growing. Even outside the town, there are problems. Because Jacobstown is full of super mutants, the NCR has grown suspicious of them, and recently started sending mercenaries to either push them out or wipe them out. The NCR claims Jacobstown is behind attacks on Brahmin caravans, even though there's no real evidence. Marcus still tries to keep relations peaceful and hopes for a proper trade agreement someday. Life inside Jacobstown is pretty cooperative. The mutants share resources and avoid fighting each other whenever possible. First-generation super mutants like Marcus usually take leadership roles, since they're more stable and experienced. Second-gen mutants usually handle physical labor, while the Nightkin protect the town and focus on finding a cure for their mental condition. Even though the town is primarily a mutant settlement, outsiders are welcome, as long as they behave, which is why both Dr. Henry and the Ghoul Calamity live there and work alongside the mutants. The Great Khans and Caesar's Legion mostly ignore Jacobstown. The only real enemy is the state of Utobitha at Black Mountain, which is another mutant group led by Tabitha that gives the rest of the mutants a bad name. Marcus has even sent Neil to try to convince Black Mountain's mutants to leave and come back to Jacobstown instead. The Bight Brotherhood is a religious cult made up of mostly ghouls, based in the old Repcon test site just west of Novac. They're led by Jason Bright, a glowing one who never went feral and believes he's been chosen by the creator. What he's been chosen for is to lead his followers on a great journey to the far beyond. Basically a radioactive promised land where they can live in peace, away from human bigotry and the violence of the wasteland. Nobody really knows when the cult first started, but they've been around at least a few years before 2279. Everything they believe comes from Jason's visions, and his followers completely trust him. He isn't aggressive towards skeptics, but he also doesn't waste his time trying to convince them. One of his closest followers is Chris Haverson, a human who fully believes he's a ghoul. The rest of the group tried to tell him otherwise, but he refuses to accept that he's still human. Because of that, Jason didn't let Chris board the rockets, saying it was the creator's will. Instead, Chris helps with the technical side of preparing the rockets, and is honored as a saint after the courier helps them launch. The whole great journey depends on getting the Repcon rockets operational, but that process gets interrupted when a group of Nightkin led by Davison shows up looking for a shipment of stealth boys. They attack and drive the ghouls into the upper floors, and for a while the Brotherhood thinks they're being hunted by demons. Until the courier steps in and clears them out, the Brotherhood is basically stuck. Once the Nightkin are driven off and the courier helps gather the last needed parts, Jason and the rest of the Brotherhood head down to the rocket bay and launch into space, believing they're going to the paradise in the far beyond. Depending on the outcome, some members actually return and help the people of Novac rebuild after the Battle of Hoover Dam. Even though they're religious and non-violent, most of the Bight Brotherhood members are well armed with energy weapons, things like plasma defenders and laser RCWs. They generally keep to themselves, mostly because human settlements shoot feral ghouls on sight and don't trust anything connected to them. A few Bright followers can be found dead around the Mojave, but it's never clear what happened to them. You mainly encounter them during the quest Come Fly With Me when Jason asks you to clear out the demons in the basement, and then you help with preparing the rockets. The state of Utobitha is a group of Nightkin and second-gen super mutants living up at Black Mountain. It's led by Tabitha, a Nightkin who's slowly losing her grip on reality, and her loyal robot companion Rhonda. The group formed after Marcus left Black Mountain. He'd originally tried to build a peaceful mutant community there, but when too many unstable Nightkin and dumb second gen started showing up, things got out of hand. Marcus eventually gave up and left with the smarter first gen mutants to found Jacobstown, leaving Black Mountain to the more aggressive and paranoid mutants. That vacuum of leadership let Tabitha take over and turn the place into her own little authoritarian mutant state. Tabitha claims Utobitha is a utopia for super mutants, but in practice, it runs like a paranoid military camp. Supplies are rationed out, patrols constantly march around the mountain, and any humans that come near are shot on sight, supposedly to protect them from radiation and pet centaurs, at least according to Tabitha. Nightkin are favored here, while the second-gen mutants are mocked and bossed around. But everyone falls in line because Tabitha keeps convincing them that invisible enemies are constantly threatening the mountain. In general, the state of Utobitha hates outsiders, especially the NCR, who they call the two-headed bear people. They're also suspicious of Caesar's Legion, though Tabitha mostly just tells her followers to be cautious. Despite their low intelligence, they've managed to keep the old Black Mountain communication gear running, and maintain some seriously heavy weaponry. Many of the mutants use missile launchers, miniguns, or incinerators, and the rest use whatever rifles or scrap weapons they can keep in working order. Their armor is pieced together from scrap metal and whatever else they can find. When the courier arrives, they'll hear Tabitha's bizarre radio broadcasts, and eventually get pulled into the crazy quest. Most of us end up fighting our way through Black Mountain and killing Tabitha, but it is possible to end things peacefully by fixing Rhonda and convincing Tabitha to leave with the robot. If that happens, the remaining mutants calm down and become friendly, and everyone loves a peaceful resolution, right? The Powder Gangers are basically a bunch of escaped convicts running wild across the Mojave. Most of them broke out of the NCR Correctional Facility, originally a low-security prison that the NCR turned into a work camp. The inmates were supposed to maintain the railroads along the Long 15, but when the Legion War started heating up and the NCR pulled most of the guards away, the prisoners saw their chance and staged a full breakout under the leadership of Samuel Cook. They overpowered the remaining guards, blew open the cell blocks with stolen dynamite, killed the warden, and then took control of the prison. After the breakout, the convicts split into different gangs. Some followed Cook to Vault 19. Others stayed behind under Eddie and became what most people now call the Powder Gangers. Smaller groups like Joe Cobb's gang started spreading out towards Prim and along the I-15, raiding caravans and harassing towns like Good Springs, Sloan, and Nipton. They even stole Sloan's dynamite supply, which caused the Quarry Junction shutdown and accidentally let the Deathclaw spill out into the highway. The Powder Gangers don't really have a one centralized structure. It's a loose collection of those smaller gangs. Eddie runs the main prison group, Joe Cobb leads the crew near Prim, and Cook commands the Vault 19 branch. Each group basically does its own thing, as long as it involves raiding, extortion, or blowing something up. They aren't friendly with anyone. The NCR obviously wants them dead for the prison revolt. Caesar's Legion hates them too because the gangers disrupt Legion raiding parties. Even the Brotherhood of Steel dislikes them because they mess with patrols near Hidden Valley. The only real allies they have are temporary. Before Nipton was wiped out, they did business there, and the Vault 19 group even talks about joining up with the Great Khans at some point. Their trademark is explosives. Dynamite, powder chargers, and homemade bombs. But most of them also carry basic firearms like single shotguns, 9mm pistols, varmint rifles, or revolvers. Some of the more distant groups are better armed and may even have laser or plasma rifles. The Westside Militia is a small group of locals who protect the neighborhood of Westside. Westside itself is a tight-knit community built around farming and trading. They're trying to stay independent and are currently arguing with the NCR over water rights, which has put everyone on edge. The militia basically works as both the town guard and the police force. They keep things peaceful inside the walls and protect the area from fiends, scorpions, and whatever else wanders too close. The group is led by Clayton, a former New Reno resident, alongside with Tom Anderson, a follower of the apocalypse who's fully committed to keeping Westside self-reliant and free from outside control. You have other notable members like Klamath Bob, Mean Son of a Bitch, and Judah Kreger. Most of the residents are proud of Westside's independence and don't want anything to do with the NCR or Mr. House. A lot of them even joke that the NCR troopers should go back home since their people must miss them. I put them on the list because they seem a little more like an actual group than just a guard unit, and they definitely have a shit ton of responsibility considering how close Westside is to the fiends. Happy Trails is a small caravan company operating in NCR territory. They're based out of Sacktown, a little north of Shady Sands, and most of their business involves running caravans between New Reno and the road up towards Salt Lake City. They've got to compete with bigger outfits like the Crimson Caravan, which hasn't made things easy. Lately, things have been rough. A few bad trading seasons and the complete loss of contact with New Canaan have pushed the company to the edge financially. To stay afloat, they're planning an expedition through Zion Canyon to try and reestablish contact with the New Canaanites. It's risky, but it's the only route that really makes sense. They can't use Interstate 80 anymore because the NCR stopped patrolling it, and the Ogden route would cost more than they'd make. The courier ends up joining this expedition, working alongside Jed Masterson. You also have Stella and Ricky as part of the effort to reach New Canaan through Zion. The Sorrows are a tribal group living in Zion Canyon. Their entire way of life is shaped by their religion and the belief that Zion was a gift, meant to make up for all the suffering humanity caused in the past. The tribe traces its origins back to a group of 24 children who arrived in the canyon in 2123. They survived thanks to Randall Clark, a former soldier living in the canyon, who secretly left books, supplies, and advice for them. The kids never saw him and believed he was some kind of protective spirit. They called him the father in the cave, and over time their entire belief system grew around his words. The Sorrows have stayed in Zion ever since, avoiding any pre-war ruins or caves because they believe entering them is disrespectful to the father. Their culture is peaceful and deeply tied to the land. They hunt and live off the canyon, and even though they complete a rite of passage that involves killing a Yao Guai and making a claw gauntlet, they still mourn any loss of life, even the lives of their enemies. After New Canaan was destroyed, surviving New Canaanites, including a missionary named Daniel, fled into Zion and unknowingly led the violent Whitelegs tribe right to the Sorrows' home. Daniel feels responsible and stays in Zion, trying to guide the Sorrows and convince them to evacuate before the Whitelegs wipe them out completely. Because of his long-term contact with the tribe, he's also been quietly trying to convert them to Mormonism, but he hasn't had much success. The Sorrows are recognizable by their tattoos, which are modeled after the Virgin River and symbolize both their connection to Zion and the hardships they've endured. They mostly keep to themselves and live in harmony with other tribes like the Dead Horses, but they will fight back when threatened. The Dead Horses are a tribal group living in Zion Canyon as well. They originally came from a pre-war settlement called the Rez, east of the Grand Canyon. After the bombs dropped, the survivors and a few stranded tourists formed a community there. Eventually, their descendants moved west, following the Colorado River until they settled at Dead Horse Point, which is where the tribe gets its name. For a long time, the Dead Horses lived a pretty peaceful life. That is, until Joshua Graham showed up. Back then, he was still serving Caesar's Legion and began training the tribe so that they could eventually be absorbed into the Legion. He taught them how to hunt, fight, and maintain old world weapons. That plan changed after Graham lost the first battle of Hoover Dam and was thrown into the Grand Canyon. He survived, returned to the New Canaanites, and eventually made his way back to the Dead Horses, but this time as their protector, not their conqueror. Under his leadership, they turned away from Caesar and learned how to defend themselves and their land. After New Canaan was destroyed by the Whitelegs, Graham brought some of the Dead Horses back to Zion to help defend the surviving New Canaanites and their allies, the Sorrows. Depending on how the courier handles the Whitelegs, the Dead Horses either help evacuate the valley or stay and fight. Either way, they eventually return to their own homeland. The Dead Horses are democratic in most of their decisions, but give Joshua full control in times of war. Most members live fairly individualistic lives, but when it comes to the safety of the tribe, they operate as a tight-knit unit. Warriors are trained for combat, but most members also act as hunters and scouts. They leave chalk markings around Zion to guide others to safe paths and to hunting grounds. Like the Sorrows, they avoid most pre-war caves and ruins, partly out of respect and partly out of superstition. In combat, they use 45 auto pistols and traditional war clubs decorated with these 45 shell casings as a tribute to Joshua Graham. Scouts can be found all over the valley, while the main warriors stay ready to defend their territory. They're friendly with the Sorrows and suspicious of outsiders, but they won't attack unless provoked. The Whitelegs are a violent raider tribe from Utah and the main antagonists of the Honest Hearts DLC. They originally formed out of various groups of Great War survivors around the Great Salt Lake. Over time, they adapted to their harsh environment, painting their legs white to blend in with the salt flats, which is where their name comes from. They became experts at scavenging and raiding, and completely abandoned things like farming, hunting, or preserving food. Their entire culture revolves around strength and warfare, and they're feared throughout the region for their brutality. For years, they fought with New Canaan over supplies and territory, but were usually kept in check. That changed when the Desert Rangers left the area and an emissary from Caesar's Legion, Ulysses, showed up. He promised them a place in Caesar's army if they wiped out New Canaan and killed Joshua Graham. Ulysses also armed them with old military weapons, including 45 auto submachine guns that the tribe calls storm drums, and then he taught them better combat tactics. This turned the Whitelegs from a scavenger gang into a serious fighting force. Their first major act was the destruction of New Canaan. They waited for Joshua and most of the defending warriors to leave, then launched a surprise attack at night, killing everyone they could find and burning the town to the ground. After salting the earth so nothing would grow there again, they tracked the surviving New Canaanites, including Joshua, into Zion Canyon and began trying to wipe out the Sorrows and Dead Horses as well, all to earn Caesar's favor. The Whitelegs follow a simple rule: strength is everything. Their leader, Salt Upon Wounds, earned his position through pure violence and is said to have killed over 100 men with his modified power fist. They make no alliances except with the Legion, and only because they think that will get them into Caesar's army. They attack anyone who isn't a Whiteleg and often take scalps as trophies. They're heavily superstitious and avoid entering pre-war buildings, but they'll still raid them for weapons and gear when necessary. The Whitelegs rely on ambushes and hit-and-run tactics. They travel in small war bands made up of different types of warriors: storm drummers with submachine guns, light bringers with explosives, pain makers with poison blades or shish kebabs, and bone breakers who fight unarmed. Their armor is crudely made from scavenged metal, leather, and cloth, and most of their weapons are in rough condition because they don't know how to maintain them. At the end of the day, they're a savage raider tribe driven by violence and the belief that killing their enemies will earn them a place in something greater, even though Caesar never had any intention of letting them join his legion. For the next few weeks, we're going to be covering most of the factions in all of the games, so if that's something you're interested in, then stick around. I really appreciate you guys watching this far. Remember, enjoy time is never wasted time, and I'll see you in the next.